Hello, everyone. I'm John Humphrey, Section Chair of Pittsburgh SMPTE, and I'd like to welcome you to our third virtual meeting. This is our second Zoom meeting, and we're getting it down. During the meeting, for what it's worth, if you want to change the view that you see, you can go up in the upper right-hand corner and click the little tiny view box, and that will change how you see the presentation. I'd like to welcome all the SMPTE members, and for those that are not currently SMPTE members, you should be aware that white papers and SMPTE Plus, SMPTE Journal, webcasts, lots of webcasts are all available to members. The meeting wouldn't be possible without the help of the managers. Beginning July, the section managers are Greg Abel, who's Secretary Treasurer, Ed Fraticelli, who is the corresponding, what I call the corresponding secretary. He sends out the emails. And Mike Janatis, Dan Turk, Bill Bennett, who handles our web and also helps us get the meetings going, George Hoover, and past chair Spike Jones. So I would like to say that this is the last meeting before the summer vacation break. We'll be back in September. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ed Fraticelli, who will introduce our presenters tonight. We have a big turnout. This is going to be a good one. Ed?
Thanks, John. Hi, everybody. It's great to be back in front of SMPTE Pittsburgh again. I've really missed all of our get-togethers. Hopefully in the fall, we'll be able to get together in person again, but that still remains to be seen. I'm Ed Fraticelli, the Vice President of Technology at PMI. This is about my 6th or 7th year of working with SMPTE Pittsburgh. But that's enough about me. We have a great topic for the presentation this evening, and I'm very interested in hearing about software design facilities of the future. If you're someone like me who makes their living in dealing with media technologies, or someone maybe who's retired from the business, or someone that's just starting out, this topic should surely be of interest to you. I'll quickly introduce our esteemed panelists, and then we can get on with it. Karl Paulsen is the Chief Technology Officer at Diversified. In his role, Karl provides his expertise to clients' projects and to engineers, managers, sales, and marketing personnel throughout Diversified. He developed and orchestrated Diversified's IP Roadshow and regularly contributes to TV Technology Magazine, my favorite magazine, by the way, and writes the Cloud Spotters Journal feature column for the magazine. Karl has held various senior level engineering positions and is a SMPTE Life Fellow, a former SMPTE Standards Co-Chair, and is a member of the IEEE Video Services Forum and the AES, and he's also a past board member at SMPTE Pittsburgh. Mike Strein is the Director of Engineering and Technology at ABC News in New York, part of Walt Disney Television. For the last 30 years, he has been at the forefront of just about every technical advancement that the ABC TV network has made. Mike has over 40 Disney Innovation Awards that have resulted in 22 U.S. patents, with several others in process. Mike is fairly active in the standards communities, has been an active SMPTE New York board member since 1997, and is a SMPTE Fellow. Mike and Karl, please take it away.
Thanks, Ed. I also want to say, too, it's a pleasure working with Karl. I've known Karl, I think, 25 years at least, since we worked on some projects at ABC way back when. And now we're working on more projects at ABC, and we talk constantly, almost daily. So this is really a pleasure. So thanks.
All right. Thank you, Mike. I would say echo the same thing. Mike and his organization is one of the first people that we got to work with when I moved to Pittsburgh in 1995. So it is truly quite a while ago.
Yeah. And by the way, Ed, we're making all this up. So, this is, who knows if this is the future or not.
I hear you. Well, I just want to note before you all get started, just to let everybody know that you can use the Q&A panel throughout the presentation to submit questions for Karl and Mike, and we'll either field the questions as we go, if they're pertinent to what's being said, or we'll save them to the end and ask the questions then. So, pardon my interruption.
Great. And by the way, we're tag teaming this. We didn't really rehearse much, so that we may be stumbling over one another a couple of times during this thing, but I don't think it should be a problem.
No, it's
So,
not formal. It's just like when we conduct meetings. as
yeah,
clients.
exactly. So many of you may know we're working on a big project in New York. ABC has sold all its buildings and at its New York campus, and there's a new building getting built in downtown Manhattan. Diversified is the detailed designer of that facility. So put Karl and I together again to look at what the facility would look like. We spent quite a lot of time brainstorming before there was any groundbreaking and thinking about things that would happen. And the world's changed a little bit too in the last year and a half. So all that has affected our thought process, I think. And we wrote a paper about a year ago about what a future facility could look like. And I think now that's morphed into what does a facility and the people look like? And that's what really this is all about. So Karl, why don't you kick it off? And if you had anything else to say, and we'll head to the first one.
No, I think you're going to hear a lot of things that have gone into the planning over the last 18 months to 2 years so far, and it's not done yet. We literally get new ideas and new directions almost all the time. So
exactly. So this is a diagram from a couple years back. We're replacing a lot of the SDI in our building with an IP router. And as you can see here, there's about a dozen different routers. When you have a large scale facility, you run into limits of how much SDI can expand. So you're probably used to putting in facilities with tie lines between them and connecting routers together and whatnot. And that was one of the first things that IP gave us. And so we wanted to use this kind of as a bridge to take that SDI methodology and thinking, and how does that go forward into IP?
yeah, one of the first things we did is took a look at these architectures and thought forward, what is it going to take to make this the most flexible thing that you can do in the future? And Mike started out with this diagram, and I'll let him explain it.
Yeah, so when we started to think of a building, and by the way, you don't get to build buildings very often at my company. This is the first time we've had any major infrastructure build since well before I started in the company, and probably the last one I'll be involved in. So we thought, what do you do? How do you make this as future proof as you possibly can? So we came up with some concepts, and this is what morphed into a paper on what a facility of the future would look like if it was hybrid. In other words, you would have what portion you would have on-prem, what portion could you take off-prem, and that off-prem could be a colo or could be public cloud eventually. And you start to look at the layers. What's in this is now there's a 2110 fabric that exists within the facility because that's kind of defined and that's a known science. But coming out of the facility, it's not 2110, it's something else. And how do you get there? What do you do to get there? And you look at the layers. There are software layers that wrap around this. There's an orchestration layer, so you know where all these inputs and outputs are, whether they're in your building or out. There's a resource management layer that allows you to spin up these resources and work with those. And there's a security layer that wraps all around that. And if you think of these things as layers, these are software layers. And how do these layers talk to one another? How do the applications that exist down within these layers talk to one another? You get all this northbound, southbound, east and westbound traffic that has to happen. And that kind of came into this diagram, and that resulted in the paper that we thought about and came up with last year. And if you look at, what that winds up being, you need new things in that facility. So one of the first things you look at doing is how do you take the workflows that you have and create the workflows that you want, right? And how do those workflows adapt and change? So the last thing you want when you're going to build a new facility is put in something that come in a forklift, a couple of years later saying, oh, well, we're doing things different now. We have to add something else in. You want the flexibility. And a software-defined facility should enable that to create new workflows, to sustain the workflows that you have. And the people then are going to need new skill sets because this is a very different way of operating. And of course, there's a security layer that wraps around the whole thing here. You would have to be living in an igloo or something if you haven't heard about all the ransomware and all the other attacks that have happened, with media companies being the focus now. And security for media companies, media is the asset, and that's exposed. And how do you do that? How do you wrap security around all that to make sure it's not? So those are, I think, a couple of the key points that we're going to talk about throughout this presentation today.
So one of the things that we recognized fairly early on in this, and it really applies not to just the Galaxy facility itself and the project, but there's a lot of very immature workflows that are going on. And you could change that workflow to be immature cloud technology, immature software technology, immature development technologies. And we're going to go over several of these, and some of them will get touched on, some will get into detail. But take, for example, just the evolution of the SMPTE standard, the 2110 standard. Of course, it didn't start out that way. It was originally intended almost 15 years ago, probably, to be a technology to carry high bandwidth signals from a venue to a home port, or from a major facility center to an edge center, those sorts of things. Even some words that weren't even in existence at that time were well thought of. And by the time you parallel the things that have happened in 2110, the things that have happened in the NMOS environment, the things that have happened in from the recommendations practices. In fact, SMPTE right now is even evolving to make a series of recommended practices. Sometimes you wonder, maybe we should have done that first, but that wasn't the case. We are now looking at how do you measure these things. And when you go down and dig really deep into the measurement part of it, you find out maybe there were some mistakes that got made in 2110, but it's a maturing technology. And you just can't go back and scrap everything you've already done unless you're a software company that we probably know of, and just say, no more DOS. We're going to get rid of that. But those are the sort of things that come up when you start this kind of planning. You have to be sure that what you build from the very beginning isn't going to hurt you later on down the road. But sometimes you don't have much choices. You just have to make the decision and move on with it.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, 2110 was kind of sort of an SDI replacement of doing the same sorts of things, and with the mindset that it was inside a facility. Now, if you look at cloud workflows and whatnot, just think how much that's evolved just in the last year or two. I mean, there are groups now to get from the ground to cloud and cloud to ground, and just 2 years ago, we were wondering about this. AWS came up with some methodologies to do this, and now at the end of the month is a plug fest for people to do these sorts of things. So this is changing rapidly.
Yeah, and of course, when you thought of an SDA replacement, you thought primarily of the plant. And now at this point, we're going, how many of these technologies that are in the plant can get ported into the cloud? One of the first things that one of the cloud suppliers did was look at the things that were core to the 2110 environment, such as UDP and PTP, neither of which worked in a cloud environment. Even multicast doesn't run the same phenomena, the same course of action. So that is changing. The cloud is changing almost as fast as the IT and IP technologies in the studios.
Yeah, exactly. And what we're starting to put in now is not big iron anymore. We're putting in applications that are running on platforms. So that's really, this slide is talking to that. What the applications now are different. They're very software centric, and there are different people operating and running these things. So the operation, I mean, I can remember control rooms where everything had to be completely dedicated interface, and and a mouse and a keyboard was considered something that only IT used. That's not the case anymore. I mean, these are software applications being run by operators more and more and more.
So some of the things that we're going to address here are how software is changing the actual operations. And one of the things that comes up is actually out of the software development or the DevOps domain, and that's called CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous development. And this is a very critical and different way of approaching things from a conventional broadcast operations, because you're not going to have everything spun up at the same time. You're going to hope you get there and that you get a functional facility, but there are things that are going to happen that we're going to require a development chain. And this is kind of an example of what's involved in that development chain.
Yeah, and if you think of the things we've had to do in the past, when you get downtime and you put in a new edit room online or you do something like that, there's less and less of that. We're on air all the time, seemingly, especially with the streaming feeds that we all have to provide. So how do you, and that's what CI/CD is about, is how are you continuously, rolling in new versions of software with the ability to get right back out in case there's a problem. So these things have to be done intelligently. And that's what, a lot of newer facilities are looking at doing these things. The CBC and in Montreal is a good example of those sorts of things. There's sorts of application management that takes care of this. You have development and production environments. You roll these over, you go back and forth. It's really a different mindset for rolling production fixes out or
Yeah.
enhancements. Yeah.
Right. And we're, those of us that have worked in the broadcast industry remember that to make any kind of a change of consequence in the facility meant you had to schedule a downtime. You usually had to cut a control room completely out of space, out of service, go in there, patch it at night, hope that everything works after you put it all back together. And if it doesn't, you better have a replay, another way of getting back to that, because you still got to play your game of being on the air every single day. That's not going to be the case in the IP world. These are kind of pieces and parts that have to have a way to test them in the absence of the rest of the facility. Literally bring products in and quarantine them from your network until you're comfortable that that version works. If it doesn't work, you've got to be able to roll it back. And in many cases, certainly in the Galaxy project, we're building an A and a B environment without complete duplication, but certainly with the thought of resiliency in mind. And that's only achievable in the software environment.
So kind of a simplistic diagram here, but I think you get the point. The people operating in these environments change. This is not a tool-based operation anymore, where someone's going in and patching and getting out their greenie and woofing somebody in. This is now development. And the operators need completely new skill sets. It's very, very different. I mean, we've heard this for years, how people need different skill sets. But when the entire facility is run this way, it's a requirement. It's no longer a nice to have.
And one of the examples of this is what's called DevOps, and it's certainly a software-centric term, and it means development plus operations together. So this is kind of pictorially. The sort of squiggle diagram on the bottom is really the sort of thinking that this could be a workflow path, this could be a software path, it could be a network path. This actually happens to be the original patent drawing that described packet-based switching in the early 80s or late 70s, I believe, when the original patents and the RFCs and so forth were written. And the right-hand side, of course, is kind of an example of what the maintenance department or the support department of tomorrow looks like. This is not uncommon right now than you find in environments, but you still have the place over in the corner where the VTR might be fixed, or the camera has to be rolled in and plugged into a monitor. Completely different environment now.
Yeah, yep. And this is rolling out in a lot of places now, but it's going to become centric, and the entire operation is going to really run this way. And it's going to be key for these folks to do this and to, like we said earlier, adapt to new workflows. What happens when you make changes? The operators and the facilities are going to have to own all this. You can't always reach back out to the vendor to get this done. So this is going to be an operation that the folks inside these facilities are going to have to own.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. So what makes a lot of this work is microservices, and there's a microservice group, the Open Services Alliance, and that recognized this a while back. But in order to make all these applications work, and that's where the north and southbound, you talk between orchestration and down into the applications that you need. How do you configure those applications? There's sort of a thing we've learned to live with, which is presets. If you want to, for example, a switcher, you can recall an EMEM, some sort of panel, you can recall a preset. On a VTR, you recall a preset. That's not what we're talking about with microservices. Microservices is done via an orchestration system can completely configure those devices and the entire environment around you. So what we want to accomplish in Galaxy is to have this environment such that it's operator-centric or profile-centric. So no matter where that operator goes in a flexible environment, the people that they need to speak to, let's say on an intercom, or the people they need to interface to, or the resources that they need to work with, become available to them. So that could be show-based, it could be operator-based, it doesn't matter. But that profile can follow them where they go. And the only way to accomplish that is really with orchestration, managing those resources, sending down the presets and the settings, not the presets, the settings to those resources of what you need to accomplish what you want to do for that show.
Yeah, the underlying architecture that goes behind this. I mean, we may have heard the word microservices being used more and more often, but that if you think about what that is, they're little chunks of pieces of software that don't impact how the other things around them work, that can be dropped into and removed from an operational perspective. So if you want to change the functionality of a intercom panel, for example, rather than going out and having to write a new driver or adapt a new API, the API automatically knows how to go out and look at the services, look through a library of structures, pull them back in, and know with confidence that it's going to work. Some of the other buzzwords that get used a lot in the cloud are Kubernetes, containerized systems, Docker, those sorts of things. That's all new vocabulary that many of us have had to begin to learn in the same way we learned about transistors when tubes went out of service ages ago now. So that's what microservices is about, and that's what we're really having to address in a lot of these situations.
And we're hoping, before we get off that side, we're hoping that the people that write these APIs do it in a common way, such that it's simple to slide things in and out. I mean, SDI allowed you to be somewhat best of breed. You could plug things together, and it you know, typically they worked. In a completely IP environment, you have to have those microservices enabled such that they can work with different types of products. So there you go.
Yeah, and the other part of it is that although we've done a pretty good job of moving from SDI to IP, there's lots of components that are required to make IP work. Whereas before SDI, you had a patch panel and some BNCs, and you could literally patch from one location to the other if the controller failed or if you needed to construct something that you hadn't had the capabilities to do in the past. Now we're trying to see how that works in a software domain as opposed to a physical hardware domain.
Yeah. And what this slide is all about is that now you have the potential to move from a CapEx environment to an OpEx environment. So rather than trying to, you know, sell your capital plan to your upper management every year on what I need to update or what I need to do, you can have a more predictable science where, you know, these applications are maybe license based, and you know, they're related back to the show. So you can say that I spent this amount of licensing models spun up, this amount of resources spun up to do this particular show, and you have a better idea really of whether shows are profitable or not, or whether they're like Remora is living off the sharks of other shows. So yeah, this maybe helps your CFO out a little bit and gets a little a better idea. Of course, then maybe accountants run the company. Maybe that's not such a good thing, but that's another story.
And it doesn't matter what the company is. So one of the other elements in this whole puzzle picture is something that they call infrastructure as code, or IAC. It's, again, an evolving piece of terminology that we're having to learn how it works. We are certainly asking the vendors that are providing new products to us. And the fortunate part about Galaxy is we have a few years before this has to go online. So there's times to query the vendors, find out what their roadmaps are, see where they fit in the ecosystem, and then make some strong decisions or drive them in strong directions. That is not unusual for new products from a development standpoint. So there's some great opportunities that we're all having by learning and telling and describing what we want to do. And infrastructure as a code is certainly one of those words where you're literally building, instead of physical wires connected to one another. You hope you only have to do that for the original startup and during the original processes, but the rest of it now becomes a code property as opposed to a physical property.
By the way, this is a somewhat idealistic picture. We don't have nearly this amount of room in the equipment rooms that they give us, but it sure looks nice. It'd be nice if we did.
Yeah, so some of these photographs that you see of data centers and things are really pretty, and you wonder, did marketing just mock this up? Because you know, you walk into a cloud center and there won't be racks around anything. You won't see pretty tiles in it. The floors are certainly not that polished. And in most cases, they don't even have any lights because there's no humans in there, and they run at, you know, 85 to 90 degrees inside. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think one of the other elements in here is this UCAAS, or Uniformed Communications as a Service, another example of a cloud adapted technology that is going to be applied to things like intercom and things like multi-channel audio and voice over IP, SIP systems, things of that nature. These are not unusual properties by networking companies that are doing this with telephone systems and so forth. We're trying to look at and investigate how this makes practical sense in the day-to-day operations of the facility.
Another idealistic picture.
Yeah, they don't run curves either.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
This is a key thing here, commissioning, and I harp on this quite often. As many of you guys know that do projects, you when you buy something, you typically throw on a day or two of commissioning from the vendor. Well, that's not going to cut it anymore. When you have a software-based application, then essentially you're going to have to customize to your workflow. So you're going to need weeks, if not months, to deploy new equipment or new workflows or new applications. So how do you do that? Well, you either have to have your people spun up to do this, or the integration type companies, of which Karl's one, need to have DevOps type teams that can go in and deploy this, and you can take these people on as consultants. But in order for this to be successful, I think in the long term, you have to own this. So even if you do use a number of consultants to build your workflows, you're going to need to own it at some point. So there has to be people on your staff that really get this, that can really deploy this and work on it. So how do you do that? You either train people or you steal them when they come in and then they work in your facility. Maybe you can hire them. But these are what the new folks are, that you're going to need. These are people that understand DevOps. They understand all those terms that Karl was throwing around before, and they can deploy. They're proficient in those types of applications that you understand, building those workflows. Maybe they're not software developers, but they're software implementers. Probably a lot of scripting and things like that.
Yeah, I kind of get a kick out of this because it really takes the old adage of a greenie screwdriver and taking them to a code sensitive person. And what this means for the future is that a whole level of training and a whole level of mindset that's somewhat different than certainly what we're doing today.
Absolutely. So one of the first things that you have to go through, and we're doing this now, is that you have to capture your existing workflows or what you do, and then you want to capture the pain points of what you have now. And if you want to build new workflows that base and do the things that you want to be able to accomplish and have now the tool sets to accomplish, you need to capture what they are and how to do them. And like I said, we're doing a lot of that now in all different areas. How do we want to do these things now? What are the pain points? What are the things that could be done better? And how do we do them? And then look at the applications and say, well, I would like to do this and put this together with that. And that's what eventually you're going to pass off to this DevOps team, these people that are going to come in and commission and deploy what you buy.
Yeah, to make the best use of what we used to call just shrink wrap software, or the software embedded in a particular product, means you have to think about what your workflows are. And sometimes this is painful. It's a challenging task. I think that the workflow tasks that we've itemized so far are well in excess of 8,000 lines of Excel spreadsheet that have things like the dependencies between one system and another, and the making of one single change in one might have a ripple effect that impacts 10 other things. And so even take something as simple as an editing platform that has its own sets of constraints, but how you use it in one environment versus another environment. For example, what do you do with live and breaking news versus programs that are being edited down or cut down for other purposes? And then there's the repurposing for the web or for OTT. All of those things are now becoming challenges that you first have to document, because you just can't throw things at the wall and see what sticks anymore. You really have to think through this, and that's kind of what this is. Business process management notation, or BPMN, is being used in many areas, even in the orchestration of the processes that go into making, say, a news show. World News or something like that has a set of desires, but if we have software capabilities, maybe we can improve the efficiencies and the performance of the systems and bring things to market faster. So that's really what this is all about.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I go back to that having to own it. This I think of so many examples, things like asset management or whatnot, where you're completely reliant on the vendor and typically one or two key people at that vendor. And if that person leaves or goes somewhere else or does something, then how do you make those changes? Sometimes we've been stuck in certain workflows because we have no way to change it. The application or the big iron hardware or whatever it was, we have no way to change what we were doing, and we just continue to go through that same workflow for years until we can put something else new that can adapt.
It also changes and certainly impacts us as a provider of services and a provider of hardware and software. It changes how that purchase order gets written. It changes the requirements and expectations. You're never going to necessarily own the code that got developed by a manufacturer, but you better know that you've got the flexibility to modify that and know what its roadmap is and how to deal with it in the future. Completely different things.
And you think about it too, it affects the documentation and infrastructure, right? So if you, quite often you have somebody build something for you, you get a set of AutoCAD files and you get some spreadsheets and whatnot. And then when you go to modify things, you do that. But what if it's all code? So it's not the same anymore. What if it's all IP and switches? Who cares what port it's connected to? That AutoCAD diagram doesn't really help you very much. It's more, what's the active management of where the signals are flowing. And so they're new tools, and they're new tools, and they're new, diagnosis tools, and there are all sorts of new things that you need to completely consider.
Right. And those tools are or the signal flows in the system now are very dynamic. There's literally processes that are done in the background to be sure that you have the proper bandwidth and a way to get out of that should one of those signals fail. Where are you going to put it? This isn't go to a patch panel and pull a patch out anymore. And it's unlikely that you're going to go to a CLI interface on a computer screen and just start retyping in IP code. There's going to be orchestration processes and automation processes that'll make those decisions, or at least think of the decisions, and then the human could go make the decision that, yeah, we want to go use that path versus the other path. So, and believe me, none of us involved in this have all the answers. We're learning about this every single day.
That's what I said. We're making all this up.
As we go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But there have been a lot of changes. So I think Karl and I were focused pretty much 2019 on how you design a facility where the infrastructure can migrate out of the facility, or how does the infrastructure migrate to anything or adapt or do anything different. Well, then COVID came along, and suddenly the people had to come out, right? So this was something no one's planned for. And I think as this is, evolved, we've had some tremendous gains I don't think we were ever going to look at before. And if you just run through a couple of these slides, Karl's
Sure.
is the TD here. But one of the first things is that we had to have social distancing, right? So people had to get out of control rooms. Well, what did this happen? What happened here? Well, suddenly you realize that if anyone who's ever been in a control room, there's a lot of ego in there. All that ego doesn't need to be in there anymore. They can go somewhere else, and they don't all have to pile into the control room. And stuff will still work. You need maybe a couple of key people, or you can remote in, as some facilities have done. But not everybody needs to pile in there and do it. You click to the next one. But we had operators, and these are some examples of what some of our people have done from home, have built tremendous environments in their basements. If you look on the left one there's an old cabinet type TV on the bottom that they use as a table. But they've created environments where they can create now. And the one on the right is probably a pretty tiny apartment or townhouse, and they squeezed it in there. And
Right
there's a
next
couple
to
more.
the stairs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a couple more examples. We can just move through these pretty quickly. And by the way, there's no truth to the rumor. We select shows with a cat, but cats are in these environments. And just a couple more examples of people working from home. Go to the next one. We typically outlaw food in control rooms, but at home you can have food because you're probably working all the time. So you can pile that up on top there too. saying, go to the next one. And, and we're all doing Zoom meetings. If you look on the left, they're actually in the middle of a Zoom meeting while they were set up and doing an edit session. So you can see that there. And, who didn't try and adjust lighting a little bit so that, you created a little bit better mood lighting at home. And if you go to the next one, this is something I think everybody did. Typically you have a laptop, right? What'd you do with your laptop? Well, you sat on your lap with it, right? Or you put it on the table. Well, all of a sudden when you had to work 8 hours a day, that wasn't good enough. So you propped it up on a couple books, you got another monitor, you got something to hold your phone up with, you got another mouse and keyboard, because, working on top of a laptop just killed your neck after a long time. So I think we've learned to create environments that are now out of the building. And if you take a look at what the traditional edit suite looks like, do we need these anymore? We've operated now in different environments. Forget about the tape machines and the other stuff that's there. Just think about the applications in the edit environments now. What do we need? Do we still need to be a little bit different? And one of the things we're pursuing now is that we've created these home environments. What does the next home environment look like? And if you go to the next slide, the home environment potentially of the future looks something like this. And maybe it's the same environment in the building. So the operator can have the same experience whether they're home or whether they're in the building. So here's an example, and when we use this to talk to vendors, the operator the display on the left is sort of the application. So whether you're an editor or a graphics operator or something, that application is on the left. On the right are some things you may need to support that application. Maybe your intercom panel, your router to dial up some sources, your multi-viewer, and these things flow back to you. And those settings are orchestrated such that when you log in or you do whatever it is so that it recognizes you, that information gets preloaded. And whether I'm home, whether I go into the building, this sort of interface is now presented to me. So this is what I think one of the concepts that we want to espouse in our new facility, and what I think a future facility would sort of look like this. We're supposed to be an agile, environment in this new place. There's not a lot of dedicated space for people. This now gives the environment that can be very flexible. And if you go to the next slide, how do you do that? Typically you can do that with in a secure way. You do that with a single sign-on, and there's authentication here. So this is true secure environments. So that's what's required, not just a VPN. A VPN is a tunnel, that's a shortcut. And everybody had to do shortcuts in the beginning of COVID, but I think we've learned how to create secure environments such that you can really accomplish this. The work from home, these scenarios where you can have the same environment or a very similar environment and create just as well are possible now. And I think that's a hidden benefit of COVID, is that we were able to do some of this and help our focus going forward. And I think a lot of people have learned. I don't think we're unique in that aspect. And I think this will be a lot of what the future is like now. You wouldn't have guessed that just a year or two ago, but I think that's likely going to be the case now.
Yeah, it's interesting that how the work processes have moved out of the facility and into the home, and that a lot of that technology pre-COVID was in place to some degree. There were ways for the graphic artist to phone in, if you will, and do something separately. And if you look at the single sign-on principle, the idea there is that you don't just sign into the workstation you're at and then sign into an application. Who has another sign-in that you have to do that? Those that work in the Office 365 or the D365 type of environments know how many times they have to authenticate themselves over and over again. Well, that's a time suck to not even have to do it, but it's also a management headache. So one of the ideas here is you sign in once, your credentials are figured out, and all the way into the automation system, the setups inside the control rooms or the setups in front of your VDI panels are sort of already pre-done based upon what your needs are. And if you need to change them, you modify them, or you make a request to modify them if it's a more secure environment, and it stays that way. And we're really looking at how you could literally, if you had to, in the middle of a newscast, pick up and go to the next control room and reconfigure that whole entire system on the fly without having to sit down and log in, log out, walk over to the next room, and on and on and on. And I think we'll get there. I think it may not be day one, but we're going to build the infrastructure and design the infrastructure for that capabilities. And then you use the principles of DevOps and infrastructure as a code, all the things that we've led up to at this point to allow that migration to happen over a potentially, a multi-year process.
Exactly. And security wrapped all around that. That's a fundamental principle.
Yeah, those that may have seen what the EBU produced a couple of years ago, it was a pyramid. It was a multicolored, multi-layered pyramid, and sort of started out with the top layer of the transport structure, and then the SDI structure and the NMOS structures and things like that. And the very bottom of it was red because it was important, but it hadn't even been really looked at too much. That was the security end of it. And several people that have since used that as a teaching tool or as an explanation tool have even voiced opinions that maybe we should have turned the pyramid upside down and started with security first and made sure that the systems were secure from the very beginning, as opposed to what we're trying to do now is navigate through already established principles and functionality and then layer the software in. So that's, again, I kind of go back to this. We've got some time in this particular project with ABC to do this, but it is a monumental challenge to get it all right and get it fluid.
Yeah, no question. And, it's not something for the topic of this discussion, but, security audits on applications when you look to buy them and vendors and how do they do things. And, some people bury passwords built in and, they're crazy shortcuts that people take because they really consider it to be an issue. And these are things you need to concern yourself with. And but security, we'll save that for another meeting. So one of the key things I think we wanted to focus on and how to make this happen and create an environment where we could try this out. We were lucky enough with Galaxy to have a few years to think about this. And what we started together, so a proof of concept is what Diversified and ABC News agreed to do together and to work on. And that's what's in full play right now. And we started that planning for it just about the time COVID started. We planned all through it, and now we're in the middle of working on it. So we'll give you a couple slides on what's it all about. So it's both, a project. It's a big project. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's also a facility. We built a facility. We essentially scrapped our old HD lab that was in New York, and took all the old equipment out. It was very painful for me to get rid of all that stuff from 25 years ago that I spent a god awful amount of money buying and, kept as like a museum pieces. Some pieces I did give to Jay Ballard at the museum up there, but, I had to get rid of all that and start thinking differently. And that's what we did. And, we took this on as a major project between both Diversified and ABC. And, Carl, you want to add anything to this? We'll go to the next.
Yeah, there's a lot of diagrams in here that they actually do have meaning. And the one on the far right, the equal sign, is really the elements of the POC. It is the critical thinking about this. A lot of people think of POC as you bring in it like a shootout might have been in the old days. But this is not about a shootout. We've literally done the homework by interviewing dozens of vendors for different principles, sometimes the same vendor for 3 different or 4 different applications. And we'll show you how that gets layered out in a little bit, a couple more slides, I think. But it's thinking about it. It's the facts of the system. It's analysis of their presentation, whether it fits in, whether it's the right product for us. What kind of problems are you trying to solve with those things? And that sort of backs up, like any mathematical equation, there's a balancing act. Some of the things meet 75% of the requirements. Some of them only meet 25%. So you've got to balance the capabilities against all of the statistics and all of the capabilities of that product, which is sort of the bullseye and the chart there. So there really is, you look at this and you sort of, what is this supposed to mean? Well, this was really the architectural description of what the POC is. So in addition to the balancing act of determining the products, we had another little challenge, and that was the detailed design. Yeah. Really couldn't go much further beyond a high-level conceptual design, like how many control rooms and how many camera shading positions and things like that. Couldn't go too much further with that until we orchestrated this POC. That we came up with some radicalized in some
Yeah.
cases, decisions that ended up in an entire architecture that we're moving from the POC, which is a parallel but different set of requirements and engineers and people actually to orchestrate the POC and then deliver the results and findings of that to the detailed design team.
Yeah, and if you think what was unique about, or what is unique about um, the our Galaxy project is that it's in New York, and a lot of times people get to build facilities. They get an 18-month, 2-year project cycle. You know, you come in, you do a little construction, you start building. In New York, it takes a lot longer to build things. So we started this 2019. Move-in date is 2024. So we're thinking, how are we going to pick these fundamental, foundational architecture, and infrastructure decisions 4 years before we move in? How are we going to do this? And so what we did was, the first thing we did was create this playbook, and Karl and I and a couple of the folks focused on this thing. And this thing was not a joke. I mean, we called it a playbook, and it sounds it sounds like something that a football team would do, but we took a whole bunch of foundational items and we split them up into topics, and we'll go through those. And we developed a plan for how to address each one of those and make an intelligent, informed decision about each part of that technical infrastructure. Um, I don't know if we're going to make all the right decisions, but I know they're going to be informed and analyzed anyway. So. Yeah, and essentially that infrastructure is how we layer all those workflows, and we'll go into what that is, but there's a lot of different pieces to this, and when you see this, these are the foundational pieces on how you make these, how you build this sort of stuff. So what we divided, and Karl can give you some more details because he did all these mind map things on the right, but we picked out these 9 what we call topics. And one at the top is probably the most key. It's the core switch architecture. How do you route everything, all these signals? And number 2 kind of is, what's the SDN that wraps around it? What's the broadcast control mechanism that goes all around that sort of thing? And as you move down through these, you audio and communications. Communications is not just intercom; it's telephony and everything that wraps in together because it's one IP system. And you move down, and we got into 8 and 9, and how do we move to a colo, and how do we move to a cloud? Well, we kind of, I don't want to say we punted on that, but we pushed that off a little bit. That's more of a 2023 thing. But for any of you who haven't seen MindMapper, Karl's like an artist in MindMapper. And there's only one other person I know that uses this. That's Brad Gilmer, Amwa. He uses all this as well. But what a great way of generating and building ideas and concepts and wrapping them together. And Karl, why don't you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, this is a product from a company called MindJet. They make 2 or 3 little projects, but the most familiar one is MindMap, and it's really a brainstorm tool. And it's exactly how this was orchestrated. So if you look on the left-hand side of the center diagram there, where it says top-level system categories, those are what you see itemized on the left. And every one of those is a set of buried, expandable pieces that when you click on it, and by the way, this runs in an HTML environment as well as a regular application. So I could send this out as just a link and it would produce itself in an HTML environment and you could look at it and read it. But every one of these topics for the top level one, the core media switch architecture, dealt with things like spine and leaf or monolithic, and then look at the capabilities of the particular vendors. By the way, there aren't necessarily any vendors in here, but we certainly took what we knew about the vendors and buried it into capabilities and performance. And from this document, or from this mind map, became how the chapters in the playbook, all 100 pages of it or so, got developed. And then you can see the little dotted line from one to another. That's a connection point or a dependency point. Every one of those could carry, every one of the little bubbles there could carry a document, for example, a PDF or a Word document that we could put in there if this was a long-term software development system. But we're now using it as a roadmap or a guideline, if you will. So that the far one, the blown up one, kind of is about the easiest one you could read. And by the way, there's I would bet over 500 different little bubbles that you see on the far right-hand side. There's protection and topology. Do we run a purple and amber environment? Do we do a 2022-7? And how do you do that? And the difference between, of course, a purple, or sometimes called amber, network versus a red and blue redundant network. So, and what's active monitoring mean? And scalability, you see the little icon next to the word, to the scalability, that's actually a document that you can pop open, and you can say, manufacturer A has this scalability and manufacturer B has this scalability. So these are all just thought process tools that we use to develop what became the POC, and then it went out through its normal processes of RFP solicitation, and then a vendor was picked to work on this in parallel with the detailed design development. So.
Yeah, we did that thing in about a 6-8 week sprint.
Yeah.
And you know, I would throw out, and altogether we'd throw out all these ideas that we really wanted to prove or to know or to understand if we could do or not. And Karl would take all those and mind map them as we were going, which was kind of fun.
And
So,
then write all the text to go with it.
Yeah.
Which had to go through purchasing and you know, people making sure the I's were dotted and the T, all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a whole other part of that. It's kind of, that was the drag part of it. That what we're talking about, here's the fun part. So this all fits into a schedule, and this is the big what we call the big picture. When we move into 2024, if you move it back from there, you see when the tech build has to happen. You know, you have to shadow, you have to you know, operate in your existing facility, move to a new facility, and then you start to look at 2021. And that's where we wanted to get this POC done, where we could have these deliverables, and these deliverables would go to the design team, the detailed design team, of what we felt these core infrastructure items could be. And this is a little more focused on how we prioritize those. So there's swim lanes for these items, as mentioned. The core media and the broadcast control mechanisms kind of wrap around each other. So that was in one. And what shows down on the bottom is what the deliverables start to come out, and where do they come out. And you know, the guys I mentioned briefly, the colo portion and the cloud enabled portion, we push those off, but we figured we'd learn those as we go along. And you know, that's not part of the scope of what the POC is doing for 2021, but we're keeping, as we go, all the learning that we can to focus and make that a success as well.
And then even after the registered deliverables are complete, so that the design team can do their diagrams and their layouts and things like that, they'll be delivered both a capabilities document and then a specification or a vendor selection process, which has to go through its normal course of things. But we said on the right-hand side, from about 2022 on, or where the big red 2 is there, the POC may continue. We don't know what that'll amount to, but there may be specifics where we want to tie something that happens in swim lane A with swim lane C. The decisions are made on the product. Now we want to integrate them. A perfect example of that is something like a facilities management system might be very valuable to us in a scheduling environment or a reconfiguration environment. We just don't have the time and didn't know how intense this was going to be when we wrote this, but that was the intention of this. You try and get your best ideas in there and hope and pray for the best.
Yeah, and the hope in that is that the POC becomes an environment that we can overlay workflows on. So it becomes sort of a microcosm of what the new facility will be, and we can, all those workflows that we capture, we can start laying on top of that. And we created an actual functional matrix of reporting for, you know, the teams that we got to work on this and how they report back up. So there's even personnel involved in this too. So skip past that one.
Yeah,
these are even more detail on deliverables and where it goes and what the future of the process is. It you know, it goes on through till we move into the new building, in theory anyway.
In many cases, these are different groups of participants, some with one specialty that has to depend upon another and vice versa. So in the core part there, you see it says visionary development. This is what Mike and I and the senior management side of the ABC News organization along with the WABC people too, because they have a stake in this building as well. But
Absolutely.
this is where we put our take our restricted brain caps off and go out in there and think about, what if we did such and such, or is there a real need for that, or are we going down a path that's just we'll never get to? That's what the visionary development part is. And we have a weekly meeting on that we bring up the strangest topics sometimes, and there's no, I don't think we've had an agenda yet on this. We just sort of
I keep threatening, but we just kind of wing it as we go along. So kind of like this. And this is the in total is the consultancy team that we have. They're like a research organization. They do a phenomenal job, and this is one of the typical report outs of where these TLSs are and where we are. And this is one from February, but where we are and we're going along. And you know, of course, with any project, you know, some things fall behind, some things move ahead. But we're pretty happy with how it's going, and we've learned a tremendous amount. And frankly, vendors have learned a tremendous amount as well. The ones that are participating in this and working on this. And what we had the ability to do with this was, first off, legal team, you know, we signed NDAs with an ungodly amount of NDAs with, you know, three-way party NDAs, which are a challenge. And just to get all that done was a hill to climb, that's for sure. But we went through these long-term roadmaps with vendors, so where they are and where we would feel comfortable with. And we were happily surprised by many, and you know, disappointed by some. But you know, we understand why some people make choices that they do, and you know. So, but I think it's been a very enlightening process and a very positive one.
It has. I've been amazed about the cooperation and openness of every single vendor that we brought in to talk to, and I think it's going to continue.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. It really has been. So we actually built a facility, as I was alluding to too. I affectionately call it Galaxy Lab. You know, in the Walt Disney Company, you have to be careful using the fanciful characters. So you know, I don't have a trademark on that or anything. So, but if I make a sign at some point, that's what the one that's going to be on the door. I think I have to go through some division of Disney to approve it, or they'll come and take me away. But anyway, let's keep moving and get away from that slide. So we actually built a facility this time, like I was saying. We used our old lab, but the old lab didn't have the power and air conditioning that we knew we needed. So this is like a data center. We have 20 racks. There's two sides that look just like this. We added 10 tons of air conditioning out on the parapet, one floor below us. Luckily, it was COVID time, so all the people that were sitting down there didn't mind the air conditioning people coming in and putting these units out on the side of the building. But now we have a tremendous amount of power, tremendous amount of AC, and believe me, you need it. We some of these racks here, these are 48-inch deep racks. We put in some spines, and the spines stick out so you almost can't close the door on the back. So we realized that we may need 54-inch deep racks in some of the in the equipment rooms that we moved to.
And the power draw on these things is really different. I can remember when we used to think of 1,500 to 2,000 watts in a particular rack way back in the early days of pre-IT, IP, and now some of these things run upwards of, well, the average one is around 4,700 watts per A and B side. And then some of them with core switches can get up to 10,000 watts in one rack. So powers, and then the air conditioning to support is pretty important understanding.
Yeah, we had double sets of PDUs on each side of the rack. And, you know, we waited to put them all in until the equipment came in because, well, you know, how deep is it going to be on one side and whatnot? It doesn't matter. It goes all the way to the back. So some of the outlets get covered by the gear anyway. So nothing you can do about that. And so this is the end game. You know, this is what some artist conception of what the facility will look like. This is Galaxy. This is in the future, 2024. It's where the footprint of the building will be. You go to the next one. Is a couple of gratuitous, you know, publicity photos here. You know, in New York, you have to do some very unique things in order to get a deal with the city. 50% of the first floor has to be retail, so there will be stores and bars and a gym or something. I have no idea what's going to be in there, but these are other challenges you have to work with. Some of it's underground and some of it's above ground, and you have to go through a public area to get between the two. And another thing is that Con Ed needed 3 substations put in this building. So on the second floor, there are 3 Con Ed substations on both sides of the building. This is on the corner. Well, it's on Varick, Springer, Hudson Streets in Manhattan. The number 1 train is on one side. The letter trains, the C train, is on the other side, and on the far side is the pump room for the Holland Tunnel. So it's not only RF hell, it's electromagnetic hell. There's all sorts of influencing things around there. Plus, you can't go very deep, so the entire building is floating. So there's a shell, and then the whole building floats within it. And some of the floors are going to be covered in mu metal. There's an actual picture of I think this is from February. Yeah, so there's actually something going up. It's an entire city block. It's 1 million square feet. So this is a significant construction. And I think we got one more recent one. Yeah, here's one from a building above. So it's moving along. Is it completely on time? I don't know. I hope so. They were able to work a lot during COVID. So this is moving along. 2024, by the way, is an election year. And for a news organization moving in an election year, we got some challenges ahead of us. So it should be exciting.
And then there's a lot of other media type development going on in this area as well. I think Google's across the street or going to build.
Yeah. Google bought a couple buildings across the street. Hudson Street is, as many may know, is the telco center of Manhattan, which is almost the telco center of the universe. So that's where AT&T and the Puck Building and Ma Bell and all that stuff was for many, many years. So there's a tremendous amount of connectivity in that area. This is a shameless plug for the article for the journal we wrote last year. That was the hybrid production facility. This was pre-COVID. We probably have to have a follow-up one. Maybe we'll do one called the software design facility. That's probably what will come out of all this. So you guys hopefully you're all SMPTE members. You can go there and take a look at that.
And that's it.
And there you go. Thank you.
We'll drop the share then. And
yeah. Well, thank you, Karl and Mike, for the informative presentation. It's I feel like my mind is on overload at the moment, and I wasn't even sure what to write down for notes. But we do have a few questions that have come in during the presentation, and we'll go over those. There's a few here already. Oh, here's one from an old SMPTE Pittsburgh SMPTE friend, Kim Cunningham, who asks, from an interoperability point of view on compliance to control and connection standards, what steps and exercises would you expect or like to see vendors take as they integrate these standards into their systems? And what can they do better to support the integrator and the end customer?
It's a great question. I'll take a stab and then Karl can follow up. But one of the key things we wanted to do was follow as much of NMOS as possible and see what people do and what they did do and didn't do. And as you know, there are proprietary methods as well, and some people develop proprietary methods before NMOS had solutions. We'd love to have things follow standards, and that was a criteria for selection, but it wasn't the only criteria. And some things work better with others, and so we're trying to sort that out. But I can only hope that things just become as standardized as possible, and that was a big push for us, and that's what we really hope to achieve.
Yeah, I think there's a universal drive towards open standards, not just a standard necessarily developed by SMPTE. If you look at the depth of the 2110 standard, it's steeped heavily in things that were done for the internet 10 or 15, in some cases 20 years ago. And we haven't tried to change those. We've tried to narrow them down and trim the rough edges off on them where they don't apply to real-time environments. But then there's so many different things that have come out of the development of just the 2110 capabilities and from a facility standpoint that the best I could hope for is that we continue this drive of innovation industry-wide rather than just try and perfect the 2110 environment by itself and forget about all the other capabilities that are out there. And I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're going forward in a whole lot of different fashion.
Yeah, well, one thing 2110 certainly is not, and that's plug and play. And that's where the groups like AMWA and others have tried to fill in the gaps there and try and be the grout between the tiles and make all these things talk to one another. And it's a challenge, and but that group has done a great job. So is VSF, and that's why we stay in touch with these organizations and try and support them, and try and come up with the best solutions that we possibly can. And standards help that.
Right.
So standards don't go away; they continue. That's
No,
great.
there's always plenty of standards or specifications too. I mean, there's one of the moanings about the standards process is sometimes it takes a long time, but there are specifications and there are, preferred methods of doing things, and there's other things to get around that. I mean, IETF for the internet has done recommended practices forever. They're not really standards, but everybody follows them.
Right.
Okay, we have another question to move on to. This one from John Luff. Can you
Uh,
characterize the development and deployment time and effort as opposed to conventional hardware solutions?
That's a great question. And that's the whole point of a lot of this is that, in the past, or maybe the not too distant future, you brought big iron, you connected it up, you got your SDI outputs, you connected them together, you started making pictures, and then it was up to the creatives to then work, right? That's not the case now. You're going to put in something that's a development project, and you have to layer your workflows onto that. So I think once the equipment is up and running, is when the work starts almost. That's when you start to implement your workflows. And I characterize that as a time frame. I think it's a long one. I mean, I think after Diversified is done, let's say Diversified doesn't have the integration project, they have the design project. If they get the integration project, let's say they did, and they go and do that, once they finish connecting everything and can hand over those AutoCAD diagrams, then we have to start the work. And that's going to be months of work implementing those workflows and getting things to flow.
Yeah, and then the traditional way of the probably the legacy way now of building products certainly for the broadcast industry was a development cycle of at least 18 months and more like 2 years to 3 years before a product could be released. And then again, the work began. It's like, was that enough of the product? Was it what the marketplace really wanted? Or does a competitor come along and fix all the problems in that mousetrap and make a better mousetrap? The beauty in this software defined environment is that the hardware construction is probably the easy part now. It's the software part that will allow the flexibility, all the things that we talked about, the workflow, the DevOps communities, the infrastructure as code, all of that stuff all integrates together, almost like a tangled web now. But there's very consistent methodology, similar methods for developing products and making them usable in frankly a shorter time frame than what it took to develop one product, and then hope that product from a financial standpoint could last for 7 to 10 years, both on the end user side and on the manufacturer's side, because some of this stuff wasn't cheap to figure out.
Yeah.
Okay. Our webmaster, Bill Bennett, had a question that he tried to submit on the chat here. Bill, why don't you just open yourself up there and ask the question in person?
Okay. What did I type here? No, I'm kind of curious about total cost of ownership. When you talk about maybe throwing a patch or cutting something over on a on a venue distribution frame or whatever you might call it for audio video signals, that's a quick fix. But in a routing environment, that may require some software development or maybe logic to implement routes later or virtual routes later. I mean, is the total cost of ownership a little bit bigger in a purely software defined environment in the future than it is today in a more physical baseband kind of infrastructure?
I don't
is it
know
a
if
shift?
it's bigger. It's different. It's more OpEx. You're paying for licenses. You may be paying yearly licenses. You may be going to be paying maintenance. Much different than it was in Big Iron. You're certainly not going to amortize your CapEx over 10 years or 12 years anymore. You're going to put this in. You're going to be constantly updating, constantly refreshing software. You can't skip those support contracts because the vendor is going to be patching and fixing things with, especially with security. So you're going to have to keep on all that. What I think it maybe is more predictable, such that you know what your contracts are and you know what your contracts will be going forward and what your licensing is. And, if that has to bubble, and one of the, the benefits of the cloud or an infrastructure like this is that if, we've always built for peak. When you build a facility, you build for the absolute peak. When you have that crisis in news and you need everybody there and you need all those facilities, but we're at peak very small amount of time. So maybe with these environments, you have the ability to be flexible, the promise of the cloud to be expandable, so that you can add on when you need to add on. And maybe that helps you. Maybe it doesn't, but we're going to find out, I think.
Yeah, I think there's another thought here too, and we'll use the examples of studio grade cameras or even handheld cameras. We've really got to the point that it's a stretch to make those cameras any better. Even your iPhone 12 has artificial intelligence and machine learning built into it to adapt the picture structures in very, very different ways than they were 18 months or 24 months ago. So it's quite possible that hopefully manufacturers will be thinking that the core capabilities of the camera itself may continue to evolve, but as a software perspective. There are products now where every part of it, everything that you would have seen in a CCU, except the control panel to run the iris up and down and those sorts of things, is now in the camera itself. And now the camera can have a pair of LC connectors running over a pair of fibers for redundancy more than from bidirectional standpoint, and go out to the system itself. And we're actually looking at products that can operate in those modes so that any camera can go anywhere at any time. And I think that software is going to be what the enabling part of that is. So the total cost of ownership will now be a physical cost up front, but an ongoing, possibly looked at from a financial standpoint as an OpEx cost long term.
Okay.
It's not getting cheaper.
No. Thanks, guys.
We have about another 15 minutes here with Mike and Karl. So if there's any other questions to submit, please go ahead and do that. And while we're waiting to see if anyone submits any more, John Luff did have a follow-up question. We can always count on John to give us good questions. So here's a follow-up. Complexity breeds risk. Is this approach one that management understands as a capital saving or a risk mitigation strategy?
Yeah, I think in your design, to save that risk, you have to put in resiliency, and that's you designed for resiliency. But I think that this is the future no matter what. So you have to embrace where everything's is going, and the potential to be in a you use the word COTS a little bit too often; it's overused. But the to be in an environment that rides on the tails of this sort of industry, and to be in a flexible, expandable environment. I mean, the underlying infrastructures that create the cloud and create these are what the next utility is. You buy for broadcasters, you buy power from Con Ed or whatever, but you always have a generator to back yourself up. So you maybe buy infrastructure, at peak times when you need it, but you always back yourself up. So I think the resiliency models are different, the backup models are different, but you always have that broadcast mentality and how to protect everything because the media is the only asset that we have. So I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah, you have to take all that into account and manage the risk and just think risk in terms of security. We started in IP and a number of years ago, but we air gapped everything. We didn't connect it up, and then when we started connecting it up to outside post houses and whatnot, we immediately had problems because we never patched anything or did anything. So now you have to. There's a different mindset, a continuous. That's CI/CD. That's a continuous patching, continuous upgrade, continuous deployment.
Yeah, I think too. There's this ongoing perspective of the cloud's going to solve all the problems in the world, and we as an integration company or a design development type of company are obviously looking at that. It's a new learning curve for us. It's a new personnel curve because the sale of hardware is not a continuing, ongoing part of the business for the long term. It's going to be the service and support of entities that want to employ us to do other things like that. So, one of the things we look at in the cloud is what is the total cost of ownership? To go back to Bill Bennett's question, is it's different for every structure and every capability that's put in the cloud, depending upon how the actual owner uses it. And there's some of that thought process is going into Galaxy is, does it make sense to leverage the cloud? Is it your own private cloud that you build? And we are going to go down that path, I think, once the POC gets to the point that we can make valid choices in the selection of the vendors and so forth in it. But it's going to have to be looked at from a cloud mentality, because really that's how the software is going to continue to get developed. So there's all sorts of ongoing curves here that we have to deal with that we haven't had to deal with over the course of the last 10 years.
Okay. Well, here's a question from myself. What would be some of the ways, some good ways that we can get our feet wet with this kind of thinking, this kind of technology? People that already work in the industry and already have, are working in facilities, maybe this is the way we want to start to go. So what's some good ways to kind of try it on, I guess?
Wow, that's a question. But what I have told some consultant groups that, I do think the future of integrators is a section of their company that becomes DevOps, that they can deploy those people. And what I told them is, and there's a lot of that now, but these are for like OTT deployments and whatnot. And, I kind of tell them, don't look at that, look at production, look at these vendors, learn about what these applications are. And, maybe these folks have classes or they have YouTube videos on how they deploy things, and look at existing deployments. If you can get in to see any of these facilities that have been built in the past few years, what the people have done, learn as much as you can. If there's presentations like this one, listen to what people were doing. I don't know, Carl, you got any thoughts on that too? Or?
Well, you like to say that education is key to this. There's foundational things you have to understand, but there's an ongoing educational process. And how you get that is variable. I mean, you can belong to memberships and organizations and attend their meetings. If you jump into it after it's been going on for a couple of years, you may be completely lost, but a year later you'll catch up with it. You'll figure that part of it out. There's lots of good webinars and seminars and things going on around. SMPTE has really expanded its learning capabilities and it is getting in tune with the needs of the future. But other than that, it's what you want to make out of it with your own effort. Is nobody's going to lead you to the stream and make you drink. You're going to have to do it yourself.
I looked in the chat room. It seems Chuck Deal wants to know how much all this work cuts into your ski time. It does. It cut into the ski time, big time.
I'm glad you saw that and addressed it directly, so I didn't have to pass that one along. All right. Well, it looks like we've exhausted most of the questions that we have so far. So just to give you a quick opportunity, any closing thoughts, anything you want to leave us with, and then we'll toss it back to John Humphrey, who will close us out.
I hope this was entertaining, I think, if nothing else. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, I think hopefully you got an idea of the scope of this project. It's an enormous project, and there's a lot riding on it, and we're trying to do it as intelligently and as future thinking as we possibly can. And I hope that came across. The whole concept of this POC and the work that went into doing it. This is a significant investment on behalf of the Walt Disney Company to do this, to commit to this. And the budget for this facility is enormous. And, to take a chunk of that and build a POC and try and make these decisions intelligently was a commitment on their part. And, so it's serious. And, there's a lot of work that's really going into this. And it's a pleasure to work with both the Diversified team and Karl in particular to do this. It's, it's a lot of work, but it's fun too. I hope that came across.
Oh, I appreciate that. It really brings me back to the sort of the first project I worked on with you, which is putting 720p on the planet. Yeah. I mean, there was a vision.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what that lab was. That lab was about creating 720p, which didn't really exist. So it's good to see it has a second life.
It does.
Okay,
Thanks,
well,
Ed.
thank you very much, Karl and Mike, for your time, and we look forward to hearing more about the project as it goes on for the next few years, and maybe we'll all get invited to the grand opening in 2024. We'll see.
One can hope.
Yes.
John, you want to close us out?
Okay, Ed, thank you very much. And guys, I can't thank you enough. It was a great presentation. We had a very good turnout tonight for the presentation. It is certainly the future. And it seems that in our industry, the only thing that is constant is change. And this is another step, a big step. And I congratulate Mike for taking this on, and ABC and Disney and Karl, because this is not business as usual. And, and the other thing that strikes me is the three most important steps to the future is going to be education, education, and education, because this is not the way it is now. It's going to change fundamentally, a paradigm shift in the way we do television. So again, thanks very much, guys. It was a great presentation. I have to say, I'm sort of pushed back on my heels with the nature of this. It is really starting over again. And I know you missed part of the ski season. I'm sorry to hear that. And Chuck Deal too. I missed part of the ski season because the weather was lousy here anyway. So, but this is a reminder for everyone that summer vacations are beginning, and so there'll be no meetings, no SMPTE meetings for July and August, and we'll be back in September. And watch your email for notes and notices about the September meeting. I think George Hoover has the ball on that. And with that said, I would like to wish everyone a good night and thank you for being at the meeting. See you later.
Thanks, guys. Been a pleasure.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.